What's up, model makers? It's mid-January 2016, and I am back with another episode of Accurate Miniatures 148th B-25 Mitchell Madness. And there is lots to talk about, so I'll just get right into it. Okay, so I am carrying on with getting the fuselage all completed on the B-25, and got to a point this morning where I had two or three things that are just what I consider sort of old school modeling things, and thought it would be a good moment to just to do a little video and pass some of this on. I'm sure most of you guys already know all this stuff, but hey, it never hurts, and there's always new folks coming into the game who can use some knowledges. So the first thing is, as I was saying on the last segment, one of the challenges was fitting this piece in that they used to cover up the hole for the no longer used belly turret on these B-25s that were used for the Doolittle raid. And what I wanted was, I want to kind of show it as being a sort of a field fix, and I don't want the seam to be perfectly filled. And so what I've used is some Mr. Surfacer 1000, which is good stuff, hard to get, but it's nice because it's basically like a super thick primer, and it works good in situations like this because I don't want to have to sand all that off. If I sand it, it'll stay flush, but if I do what I'm about to do, it'll leave a bit of a wetness there where the gap is. Now, a lot of people will tell you use isopropyl alcohol or use lacquer thinner to rub this stuff back. I find that IPA isn't quite strong enough, and lacquer thinner is a little bit too strong, and it'll craze the plastic. So what I do is I mix about 2-to-1 lacquer thinner to IPA, and that seems to be a really good mix. And I just get some of that on the Q-tip, and I get the Q-tip nice and wet so that I don't have to rub real hard, because the rubbing is what screws up the detail there, and that's that's the last thing I want to do, is mess up the surface of the plastic itself. So I try to get try to apply the least amount of pressure possible and get in, get out. Get that rubbed down quick without a lot of pressure, and then be done with it and move on, so that, again, like I said, I'm not screwing up the plastic any more than I have to. And you can see that that leaves me with pretty much exactly what I want. This thing is stuck to the paper towel for reasons that will be clear here in a second. So there you go. You can see that's got that fairly well smoothed in there. Okay, another place where I use the same technique is right here. This thing had a horrible and unexplainable gap between the bottom of the horizontal stabilizer and the top edge of the fuselage where they meet, right here in this area. And obviously that's a real pain in the ass to get at with sandpaper, so I did the exact same thing. I just brushed in some Mr. Surfacer 1000 and did a couple of different, a couple of layers to get it nice and smooth, and then just came back and did a quick pass over it with the Q-tip, and you can see I've got that nicely taken care of and never even picked up the sandpaper. So sorry, sandpaper elves, they may be going on strike because they're just not getting as much work as they'd like, but hey, that's what I prefer. I mean, if I can avoid ever picking up any sandpaper, that's the best. It's not that I have an issue with sanding. I don't mind doing it, but it's one of those things that the less of it you have to do, the better off you are for lots of obvious reasons. Okay, now, if you are extremely observant, you may have noticed that I have a very fancy accessory added to the Bombay right here in the form of this large 3/8 inch zinc cadmium coated steel nut. Now, why is that there? That's because this kit calls for a lot of nose weight if you want it to not sit on the tail. And the folks at Accurate Miniatures are very kind to provide you with a bunch of these brass plates to stack into the nose in order to accomplish that. And you may be asking yourself, why are some of them still sitting on the workbench? And the reason is because they go behind this bulkhead right here. And there's some that go directly behind the instrument panel, and they fit fine. Then there's a bunch of them that look like this, and there's 3 different sizes of them that go in to the compartment right here next to the landing gear. And it's just terribly engineered. These pieces are cut to fit way too tight, and there's a total of 8 of them, I believe, and I could only get 5 of them in. Those numbers may not be exactly right, but the bottom line is I had 3 of them that wouldn't go in, and it's not the kind of thing that you want to force. And so here they are, still sitting on the workbench, and I felt like that even though it was leveling out, when I just set it here on the trusty orange anvil, it was balanced. I still felt like that it could use a little bit more weight in front of the pivot point, and so I added that nut there into the Bombay since nothing else is going on in there. Obviously, that's not quite as much leverage as if it were out here at the nose, but as long as it's in front of the main gear, it's fine. So at this point, I'm 100% confident that this thing will not be squatting on its tail, because as it sits right here, most of the weight that's going to be hanging off the back end behind the main gear is on there. So we're all good. Now, to explain why the thing was stuck to the paper towel. That's because right here, you can see with this horrible looking mess that I've got this navigator's window glued in. And I glued it in with this stuff, my 6-minute Great Plains Pro Epoxy. I'm not sure what differentiates Pro Epoxy from every other kind of epoxy, but hey, I like it. It works good. It gives me good working time, a little more than I anticipated, obviously, since I stuck it to the paper towel. And most importantly, is it cures up crystal clear. So if you have a situation like I did here where I had to enlarge the hole for that window, and when I got it in there, it wasn't a perfect fit. There was a little bit of a gap on a couple of sides, kind of like there was, as I was explaining before, with the landing lights. And so for filling those gaps, you want something that's crystal clear, but yet strong and sandable. And so 6-minute epoxy works good for that. And I thought I'd show you guys how I'm going to now render that window back to its previous mostly crystal clear condition. I think all that's fairly well dried up. Okay, so first things first. I'm going to use a flat file to knock down the high spots. And the reason that I use a flat file is because as opposed to a sanding stick, this is perfectly rigid. And so I won't get any rocking back and forth or, any weirdness that will cause it to be misshapen when I'm done, like you will with something that's softer. So, and this is a pretty crappy file. In fact, it's due to be replaced here soon, so don't immediately start making comments below about what a embarrassing condition my 6-inch flat file is in. I know. and it's going to get fixed, trust me. I don't like worn out tools. Okay, as you can see, sometimes this takes a little bit of elbow grease, but what I'm looking for is to just keep working it until I've got basically the profile of the window is all that's showing in the plastic there, and that tells me that I've got all, if not all, or at least most of the epoxy filed down, and the thing is basically flush. So now I'm going to take after it with my 240 grit sanding stick. Part of the problem is that the epoxy's not 100% cured, and it's still a little gummy, and it's fighting me a little bit there. So if you can, give the epoxy a few hours to cure, then that's the best thing, because even though it says 6 minutes, that's basically how long it takes before you can touch it and handle it. Full cure always takes a little bit longer with these things. Okay, as you can see, I had to resort to a little bit of scraping, but that's never a bad thing anyway, because that knife blade passing across there will definitely let you know if you've got an edge sticking up. So here we go. We'll get this thing finished out. Last pass with the sanding stick, and things are looking and feeling pretty flush, at least as far as I can feel with my funky fingers. All right, then a quick hit with the sanding sponge to get out any of the last big scratches. All right, so things are looking pretty tidy, I think. I'll go ahead and hit it with some steel wool. This is the same 4/0 steel wool that I use for everything. As far as I know, it's the finest grade of steel wool, and estimates that I've seen say that it's about the same as 800 grit, 600 to 800 grit sandpaper. But I like it because it gives you a good tactile feel for when you've got things smooth, because the friction definitely changes. Okay, so that's pretty good shape, and you can see it's starting to clear up there, and I think we are ready for the final step. So what I do is, now I've got this Novus polish. Now, Novus comes as a system, and you get 3 different polishes. But what I have found works pretty good in this situation anyway, is to just go straight to step 2, and that's all I use. What I do is I just squirt a little bit of that on there. Don't worry about the mess. And then just work it with my finger a little bit. And that's more to kind of dry it out than anything. I'm not really actually doing much polishing that way, but here in a second, when I get after it with the rotary wheel, it's going to start flying all over the place, and I'd like to have as little of it on the camera lens as possible. Okay, so here is my Proxxon Micro Mott EF50, which has been a super good tool, one of the smartest things I ever bought for my workbench. And you can see I've got a little buffing wheel on the end of it there, and I'm going to crank it up. This thing starts at about 500 RPM, and goes all the way to 20,000, and I'm just going to crank it up to about 7. That seems to work pretty good. And I'm going to get after it. Just like that. That is, I guarantee you, at least as clear as that window was out of the box. And you can see I've got a little bit of epoxy on the inside of it, but at this point, you know, it's kind of it is what it is kind of a situation. So I'm just happy to have the damn thing in there looking fairly decent, because it wouldn't go in there at all before I opened up the hole. So after taking care of all of those fun old school model making tasks, I got into another one. I just thought I was out of the woods after I finished with all those things. And that was until I decided it was time to add the chin piece to the nose, which you can see right here. Now, that looks like something that should be fairly straightforward, because even though in my view it's a silly bit of engineering to have it as a separate piece, it's just a straight planar joint where you glue this piece on to the front end of the fuselage. And that's how it went on this side, which you can see was nice and well aligned, and everything was happy. What you can't see on the opposite side, because I've already done a tremendous amount of filing and sanding and rescribing, is that this entire edge, basically from the opening of the landing gear door all the way up to right here, was very badly uneven and misaligned. And try as I might, there was just no way to force it into place. You might be able to if you kind of knew that was coming and you didn't have the pieces glued to the inside of this already, but this part's fairly rigid, so it just wasn't going to happen. But there was probably a step of close to, I would say, a millimeter, 40 thousandths right in here, and it was a little less up here, but still, it had to all be filed down. And that's where it's really good to have a very sharp flat file. I have a 6-inch one in my case, because in a situation like that where you basically need to plane that surface off and not get into other things, a sanding stick's really not the right way to go, because it's just too flexible. So at any rate, I should mention that the reason you see a white line there is because it also had a gap, and I filled that with stretched sprue first. And then once that had cured up, I took some sprue glue, which, for those of you who don't know, is basically just using a little bit of your like the last 1/4 inch of Tamiya extra thin that's in the bottle, and dissolving a bunch of chunks of styrene in it until you get a nice goopy consistency. And I brushed that into over the top of the gap. And I let it cure for a long time. It ended up being weeks, actually, and so it was nice and hard. And that filed down really nicely. And now I have basically a weld there that's the same material as everything around it. And so not only is it strong, but it scribes much more effectively than a filler putty does. So at any rate, that's where it's at now. All of that's been smoothed down, polished, and rescribed, which you may be able to see there. So that's all ready to go. The other thing that I did was back here behind the gun turret, I added this piece of styrene to represent a blast plate. What a lot of these ground crews found was that on this aircraft, the 50 cals, if they were anywhere close to the horizontal position when they were fired, they would basically blow the rivets out of the panels back here. And so they were adding a thin steel plate to that as basically a blast shield, a reinforcement. So I've done that with a little bit of 10,000 styrene sheet, and that came out pretty good. And I also have done all of my rescribing that I had to do along the spine there, and it's now ready for its first shot of primer to diagnose all those joints and make sure that they're all shipshape before we go on to any further painting. Okay, so the b-25 has seen some significant progress since that last clip, which was a couple of weeks ago, and I've got quite a few things to talk about. Where I left off was I had just done what I thought was enough rescribing and re-riveting, and was about to put some primer on to kind of diagnose and see how I had done, and that told me exactly what I thought it might, which was that I suck at re-riveting and rescribing. One reason is because I'm just clumsy, but I also just don't have a lot of experience at it. But this is what I'm using to do my scribing right now. This is a scribing tool recommended by Paul Budzik, and it works good. It's nice and sharp. But I've learned a few things about using it, and one is that I don't control it very well. And that's why I've got this blob on there that I shaped out of epoxy sculpt, which is nice because it lets me get a good pencil-like grip on it and keeps it from rotating in my fingers when I'm moving down the surface. So that works pretty good, and I'm getting better at it. I also have been riveting by hand, one rivet at a time, and you can see I've got a similar blob on this tool to help me apply pressure, and it works good. It makes nice little rivets, but what it doesn't help me do is keep them consistent and in a straight line and, evenly spaced. So after my first layer of diagnostic primer, I've decided that I was going to have to redo some of my riveting and scribing, but for the most part, I think I've got it shipshape now, and I'm ready to move on. But one of the issues that's come up, if you remember, I talked in one of the previous segments about the two halves of the fuselage not being aligned, and that's caused an obvious problem in a couple of places. And that's where I have panel line joints running across the fuselage center line. And you can see that there are 3 or 4 of those here, and most of them are acceptable, and one of them, which is truly terrible, which is this one right here, is going to have a part stuck in there that I think is going to sort of disguise it enough that I'm willing to leave that one the way it is. But I've got, well, part of the reason why I'm willing to do that is because, as you can see, those joints run around the side of the fuselage. You can see that they go clear down there to the wing root. So you can't really fix it by just working on the part that's crooked, because that makes the adjacent section misaligned. And if you then sort of carry on with that, then you end up, working your way all the way around the fuselage. Now, the worst one, fortunately, is that one right there in front of the turret, and it just looks terrible. And I think I've about decided that I'm not going to let it stand because it's just so crooked. And the good news is that it only goes a little way around the fuselage. So I think what I'm going to do is just fill in one section of it and then redo it, rescribe and re-rivet it, and get that fixed. I'm feeling good enough about my rescribing and re-riveting skills at this point that I don't see that as too huge of an obstacle. So not too big of a deal there. Another issue that I found when I assembled the fuselage and added the vertical stabilizers is that there seems to be a little bit of a twist in the fuselage. It sort of shows up when I've got it sitting here on this surface, and I don't know if you're going to be able to really tell, but I don't know how that's going to turn out. It's not really going to be completely clear how bad it is until I've got the thing sitting, perfectly level on its landing gear. But I don't know that there's anything much I can do about it because, where it manifests itself is in the tail plane being uneven. and it's significant enough that I've noticed it pretty quickly. And that's a real disappointment because that's a major issue, and I honestly don't know what I would have done to fix it along the way without some sort of serious surgery back here around the tail. And that's just that just goes beyond what I'm willing to do to get this project done. So at any rate, moving back towards the front end, I've been spending quite a bit of time there because if you remember the last segment, the fuselage basically ended right here. And the next thing that I had to do was add the chin piece to it. And, I think I've said maybe before that I think this whole strategy of having this separate chin piece is a little bit silly, and I'm sticking to that. I understand that the reason that they've done that is so that you can do different versions of this aircraft. You can go to the glass nose version or you can go to the gunship version by simply changing this one piece. But I believe there are other ways that they could have accomplished that without having this piece hanging off the end here. Now, I wouldn't be as annoyed by that if the chin piece actually fit the way that it's supposed to. But it does not, and it involved a significant amount of work to fix it. And I'll see if I can show you that here. If you look at the joint down here on this side, right here, it's pretty nice, almost perfect, all the way around to the landing gear bay opening. But on the other side, it was horrible. It had a gap that was probably, I'm going to say, a good 10 or 15 thousandths between the two pieces, and it had a step that was probably as tall as half a millimeter, 20 thousandths of an inch around the curve underneath here. But fortunately, it lined up fairly well up here at the top. So what I decided to do, because I knew I was going to have to rescribe that, and I wanted a good foundation for that, is I first filled the gap with some stretch sprue and some Tamiya extra thin. And then I came back with some sprue goo, which of course you make by just dissolving some sprue in the last quarter inch of your Tamiya extra thin bottle. And I used that as a filler over the top of the gap and to build out, let me rewind, because that's actually not what I did first. What I did first was I used a flat file, a good sharp new flat file, to bring this surf side of the gap down to where it was level with this side. So basically just worked it down until I had gotten rid of the step, and I had to file clear back, a half an inch or more to really fare that in smoothly. But once I did that, then I came back with the sprue goo and filled over the top of that. And I let that cure for about a week, and then came back and filed it and sanded it and polished it. And that worked really well. I had a nice smooth surface that was ready for rescribing and re-riveting. And that is, in fact, what I did. I came along and I had to rescribe the panel line that was down here, and then this one right here, and then around the circumference of the fuselage there, and then a little bit on these two, and then re-rivet all of those. And I had to rework it a little bit, a couple of times, but I'm pretty happy with the result now, especially given how poor the quality of that joint was and how bad the misalignment was. So I'm feeling pretty decent about that. I've now gotten to the point where I am working on masking the canopies, the glass sections, and about ready to mount those. And there's a little bit of discussion there. This is the main canopy section that I'm using, and as you can see, I've chosen to, well, I didn't choose, I ended up masking the center section with bare metal foil because the piece from the Edward mask set was just no way, shape, or form going to fit. It was terrible, and it just wasn't, in my judgment, a situation where I felt like I could cut the Edward mask into sections and use it effectively because of all those round corners that you can see there. Now, bare metal foil is a little bit of a challenge because when it comes time to remove it, it's going to be a little bit tough to get it off, and it may leave some residue, but it's not too bad. You basically just scrape it off of there with a toothpick and then use a little bit of mineral spirits on a paintbrush to remove the residue. So that won't be too big of a deal. This is about ready to assemble to the rest of the fuselage. But I should note that one thing I had to do before I masked it was I had to polish it. Both this piece and the nose glass piece had a very substantial orange peel texture on the inside for sure, and some on the outside. And they took quite a bit of sanding and polishing to smooth that out, and it helps, but it's still not great because, as you can see, there's quite a bit of distortion, which is caused by the thickness not being consistent. So, I did the best I could with it. These pieces are really ridiculously thick, and it just is what it is. There's not much I can do about that. I'm not gonna, get crazy and try to vacuum form or do anything like that. It is, it's going to be what it's going to be. So. I am about ready to mount these on. Now, they don't fit perfectly, and so there's going to be some work involved with that. If you look at this, you can see with the extra canopy here that I'm using that it's a pretty tight fit here at the back, but as you go around the circumference of the fuselage, you get a bit of a gap there, and that's that's another effect of the fuselage halves being misaligned. So I'm going to have to work on that to get that dealt with, but that I think will actually be fairly straightforward compared to some of the other stuff I've been dealing with. I had a similar issue with the nose glass, although it wasn't caused by the fuselage misalignment. It's just caused by the fact that this chin piece is just warped and just poor fitting, poor engineering. When I mounted when I test fit the nose glass, which you can see is a real pain in the ass because there's not any sort of locating tabs or anything, I discovered that it was a pretty good fit all the way around except right here in this section. And there was a step that was almost, it's probably 50,000, not 50 thousandths, but half a millimeter, so maybe 20 thousandths at its worst, right here on the corner of the circumference, where the fuselage side was taller. So what I did was I took a black Sharpie, and I basically just painted the edge there. Whoops. I just painted that edge right there. And then I mounted the nose glass, taped it down really tight, and used a scribe, which is basically just a sharp needle, to scratch a line around the profile and create a border that I could see in that black ink. And then when I took the nose glass off, then I knew exactly how far I had to file that down to get it to the correct shape, the correct profile. So that wasn't too bad. I reshaped that and then rescribed and re-riveted that area right there, and I think all of that's going to end up fine. So I am just about ready to go ahead and mount the nose glass, but before I did that, I had to add the rest of the parts to the interior of the nose, which you can see here. And there's a couple of things to talk about there. I used the Pavla resin seat for the Bombardier because it had seat belts on it, and it was molded fairly nicely, and I think that turned out pretty good. Now, one thing about this particular Mitchell, because it's one of the Doolittle Raiders, is it does not have the Norden bomb sight in it. They ditched that because They knew that they were going to be bombing at really low altitudes, and it just didn't work that well at 1,500 feet. And so what one of their guys did was he came up with this clever solution, which was to take a piece of aluminum sheet and bent it into an L shape, or maybe it was already a piece of aluminum angle, I don't know. But anyway, basically he created a sort of just a simple sight that the bombardier could eyeball along the length of it to figure out when to drop the bombs. And that's what they used in place of the Norden bomb sight. Now, I don't know exactly what that looks like. I haven't seen any photographs of it. So I kind of just, imagined what I thought it might look like. And that's what I've got right here is this little thing there. It doesn't show up really well with the nose glass in place. So I don't think anybody's going to be judging that detail too harshly. But the sort of punchline to that is that in digging around for something to make that out of, I ended up using a piece of the broken nose gear actuator linkage from the kit itself. So it was fairly easy to just glue that in there. And hey, I've got a little manual bomb sight in place. Alright, since that last clip was filmed, it's been about 6 weeks, and I thought that I was going to take the last month of December and really hammer on this thing and make a lot of progress. And as you can see, I've made very little progress, or at least in absolute terms. But before I talk about that, I want to go back to something that I mentioned in the previous clip. And that's this twist in the tail, and see if I can show you that a little bit better, because I have taken a closer look at it, and it is definitely there. So if you look, you can see that I've got the thing sitting in this vise. And if you look back there along the length of the fuselage, even though there's a lot of clutter in the background there, I think that you can probably see, let me back up a little bit, I think you can probably see what I'm talking about. There is a definite clockwise tilt to the horizontal tail plane. I would estimate that it's something like 3 degrees maybe. When you measure it, there's about a 5 millimeter difference between this side and this side. So it is definitely there, and it is definitely distinct. And the nutty thing about it is, if you take a look at the construction, okay, this is all pretty squared away. All of this stuff went together exactly the way that it seemed like it should have. In fact, it was one of the better fitting parts that I've added to the fuselage, which is sort of the ultimate irony, given that it's such a disappointment in the way that it turned out. But you can see that all of this right here is flush. When you look at the joint right there, that's pretty much exactly the way that the joint went on. The joint is actually right across here, and it was almost, well, it was 100% flush when I built it. And if you flip this thing over and look at the bottom, all right, there's the root of the horizontal tail plane on the port side. And on the starboard side, there it is right there. So the joints all look like they're supposed to. There was nothing that, gave me any kind of a signal when I did it that there was going to be a problem. So the only thing that I can conclude is that there's just a major flaw in the tooling that actually must have the sides of this joint right here not being level across their surface. So you can also see how difficult it would be to solve the problem. Basically what I'd have to do is break the tail plane loose, shim it up under one side, and then completely redo the joint right here. And I just don't see that happening, quite frankly. I'm about ready to move on from this thing. And a big part of that is because after the experience of getting to this point with the nose glass, I'm ready for another long break. When you count them up, this thing has got right at 50 panes that have to be masked off when you include the turret and all of the fuselage glass. And honestly, in thinking about it, I don't know that there's any other American aircraft that's got as many. I mean, maybe a Liberator, I don't know. But whatever, it's a lot. And in usual Edward fashion, most of the masks fit pretty well. Some of them didn't fit at all. Like this top panel on the main canopy here, and a few of the ones on this curved nose glass. Now, this nose glass is forgivable because it does have so much curvature, and that's a tough thing for masking tape. So I ended up doing those by hand, just trimming little pieces off of the Edward mask sheet. But some of them just plain don't fit. And to be fair, some of that comes down to the poor quality of the molding. When you get in really close, I don't know if I could even zoom in close enough with this video camera, but this panel right here in particular has inside radii on most of the corners, and they're not consistent. And those are not cut out in the Edward mask. And so I decided that the simplest thing to do was fill that in with bare metal foil. And even though that's a real nice masking material in that it conforms perfectly, it is kind of a hassle to get it off of there once the painting's done. So that's going to be a bit of a chafe, but it is what it is. I really felt like that was the most effective way to get that properly masked. The other major issue with all of this glass that came into play before I even got to the masking, and this applies to the fuselage windows too, is poor fit. You can see that there are a bunch of portholes along the length of the fuselage. There's a total of 10 of them, in fact. And just like this one here in the top, I think 6 or 7 out of the 10 had some kind of a fit issue. Some of them had gaps, but most of them actually just stuck out too far from the surface. So in other words, if you ran your finger up against it, you'd feel an edge. And I had to sand and polish all of those down so that they would be flush with the surface of the fuselage. Not too big of a deal, just time consuming. There were some issues with the fit of the nose glass as well, part of which I talked about in the last clip. This chin glass, or this nose glass here, whatever you want to call it, I talked about how I had to shave down this side of the fuselage. This piece, the nose tip glass, had a pretty major step in the joint right here, and so I had to feather in an area of 3M spot glazing compound all through here to blend that in, because there just wasn't a good way to shave it down. So that was a bit of a hassle, but again, you know, no hill for a stepper. It is what it is, and you just do what you got to do and make your choices about what needs to be fixed and what you can live with. Speaking of, I'll show you this since I talked about it in the last clip, and that's this panel line right here that, come on camera, focus up right there. Don't pay attention to that stuff in the background. There we go. That panel line joint there across the top of the fuselage that was so horrendous before, I did go ahead and fill it in and rescribe it, and I'm much happier with the result. Not perfect, but definitely an improvement. One thing I did there that might interest you is I picked up a tip on the old interwebs about using super glue as a filler for that type of a problem. And I had always refrained from using super glue because it gets so hard that it becomes tough to sand it down, and given that it's harder than the surrounding plastic, you get a differential effect that can really give you an irregular surface. But what I read was that if you sand it within an hour of applying it, that you don't have that problem. And so I did that, and it worked really good. I was really pleasantly surprised. So I will add super glue to my arsenal of fillers. All right, so there you go. Lots of work strictly on the fuselage. It's been quite an adventure to get to the point where I feel like I'm finally ready to spray primer on that thing. I had read somewhere on the web that one guy said it took him 20 hours just to get the fuselage halves together. And I think he was only talking about dealing with the interior details. So I can totally understand that. I've got a lot of time in getting the fuselage to the point where I feel like it's ready for primer. And quite frankly, most of it is just down to issues with the kit, which are many, as I have hopefully done a good job of showing you. But you can't make excuses. If you're going to choose to build it, then you've got to make a decision about whether or not you're going to deal with those issues. You either do or you don't. I think that some people want to raise the question of whose fault is it. If you don't get a good result with this kit. And I would have to say that ultimately the responsibility lies with the craftsman, because you've got the choice of whether or not you want to tackle these issues and try and fix them. I've made a decision that I'm going to try and fix every single issue that I come across, but I've had to back off from that because it just goes too far for me, like the issue with the tailplane. Another issue is the thickness of the canopy frame panes. They're inconsistent in both width and thickness, and really the only way to fix that is to file them all off and replace them with maybe tape or something like that, or just paint them on like Paul Budzik does. But not only do I not really want to go to that amount of effort, but by the time I really figured that out, I already had all my masking on, and I wasn't gonna do that twice. So again, the issues with this kit are real, even though some people don't like to talk about them. But again, you've got to decide whether or not you're going to deal with them. Because if you don't, then that's on you. Now, I will say that if Accurate Miniatures had done a better job of engineering and tooling this thing, you wouldn't be in the position of having to make that choice. But it is what it is. No point in crying over spilled milk, right? All right, so there you go. There's another episode out of the way, and if you've been sticking with me through all of this, I appreciate it. I hope it's been informative, if nothing else, about this particular kit, and maybe some good techniques along the way. When I decided that I was going to do a step-by-step on this project, I really had no idea what I was getting into. So it's been an adventure, and it is still pretty far from over. Although I really do believe that finally the next video segment will see me get possibly all the way through the basic paint stages, because the wings are essentially ready to go, save some rescribing. So we'll see. Hopefully those will not be, hopefully I won't have jinxed myself on that score, and that will go smooth. All right, guys, as always, thanks again for watching. Much love.